Hey guys. So, something I found that was very, very fascinating. It really confirmed everything I've been saying since October 7th. And really everything I've been saying pretty much anytime I heard anybody on any college campus or any protest talking about Israel and the slogans that uh, you know, they utter or scream. Something I found in a place called the Wilson Center. This is I guess a think tank or archive center for archives, political archives. Article entitled "The Soviet Union and the Six-Day War: Revelations from the Polish Archives." So this is basically something that they published in 2011 in the Open University in Israel. It was essentially a document that was written by the Brezhnev, the Soviet regime during Brezhnev, and it translated into Polish. And it's basically an assessment of, of Israel or Israel's aggression after the Six-Day War. Israel's aggression, right? Israel, who got attacked, who I guess preempted their enemies. Okay, see, it says, new archival evidence from Poland sheds light on the role played by the USSR in the events leading up to the outbreak of the Six-Day War and during the conflict. The evidence is based on Leonid Brezhnev's secret report at a plenary session of the Central Committee of the Soviet Communist Party, held on June 20th, this is already after the war, entitled On Soviet Policy Following the Israeli Aggression in the Middle East. A copy of Brezhnev's brief was translated into Polish and subsequently circulated among the leadership of the Polish Communist Party. So let's skip a little forward. This is talking about all the stuff that the Soviet Union wanted before the war and their whole strategy and all this kind of thing, with vis-a-vis Syria and Egypt and etc. Okay, so let's skip to what was the perception afterwards. Okay. As the document clearly demonstrates, Brezhnev perceived the Israeli attack on Egypt and Syria as an act of aggression supported by the US and Western European powers. He dismissed Western attempts to portray the Six-Day War as a local conflict resulting from a protracted quarrel between Arabs and Jews. He vigorously claimed that the Israeli attack was part of a worldwide campaign designed to suppress the anti-colonial struggle and hamper the turn to socialism in the progressive societies of Asia, Greece, Africa, and Latin America. Folks, I'm going to read this again. He dismissed Brezhnev, the Western attempts to portray the Six-Day War as a local conflict resulting from the protracted quarrel between Arabs and Jews. He vigorously claimed that the Israeli attack was part of a worldwide campaign designed to suppress the anti-colonial struggle and hamper the turn to socialism in the progressive societies of Asia, Greece, Africa, and Latin America. We continue. Brezhnev described Israel as a tool in the hands of Western imperialism and claimed that the Israeli assault had been planned carefully by the West. It's not like Egypt and all these other countries amassed tanks on the border of Israel, right? It's not like they were whipping up propaganda in their own newspapers that they have to throw Jews into the sea and all, folks, and all these cartoons that you could look at that were going to turn, Israelis, the people of Israel into dust, right? No, none of that was happening. According to Brezhnev, Israel's military campaign aimed at overthrowing the progressive regimes in the Middle East, really progressive, in the Middle East, diminishing the influence of the USSR on its Arab clients, and restoring the predominant position which Western powers had held in this region until the mid-1950s. To support this thesis, the Soviet leader claimed that prior to the June 1967 Six-Day War, Israel had received massive military supplies from the West, and its armed forces had been equipped with the most modern assault weapons. Oh yeah, sure. In the brief, Brezhnev dismissed allegations that the Soviet government had encouraged both Egyptians and Syrians to threaten Israel. Folks, I mentioned this before. My grandmother worked in a government office in Lvov, and she always mentioned how these, you know, officers, Soviet officers, would drink after work and talk about how stupid the Egyptian army guys were. You know, that they tried to teach them anti-aircraft, all that stuff, and all they were doing was praying 5 times a day. Anytime, you know, and they said, "What are you gonna do if there's an attack?" "No, we have to pray. We have to pray." He claimed that Moscow's military aid to Arab clients was mainly designed to assist them in their protracted struggle against colonialism, to consolidate their independence, and to improve their capability to defend themselves against both external and internal dangers. Moreover, the Soviet leader indicated that his government feared that a potential suppression of regimes in Cairo and Damascus might lead to the collapse of the anti-colonialist movement in the Middle East. Folks, apparently these countries that were set up by nation-state that were set up by colonialists were part of an anti-colonialist movement in the Middle East. Folks, go on any college campus today. Go on any college campus today. Okay, I continue. Subsequently, the regional and global balance of power would tilt in favor of the West. Okay, so now we get the Soviet miscalculations and failure to control the mid-May 1967 crisis. In his overview of events which led to the outbreak of hostilities on June 5, 1967, Brezhnev pointed out that in mid-May 1967, Moscow had received information that Israel was contemplating a military campaign against Syria and other Arab countries. In light of this information, the Politburo of CPSU decided to inform the Egyptian and Syrian governments of Israel's plans for aggression. Unfortunately, Brezhnev refrained from revealing critical information about the controversial Soviet warnings regarding the buildup of an Israeli assault against Syria. He limited himself to saying that, quote, "There were many signs that led us to conclude the serious international crisis was in the making and that Israel had prepared an act of aggression supported by Western powers." Before the CPSU plenum, Brezhnev stressed the fact that Kremlin had no desire to incite war between Israel and its Arab neighbors. Moscow only intended to contain the state of Israel and to forestall its aggressive plans. This little French fry-shaped country, you know, that didn't even have what today is called, you know, they call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, didn't even have Golan. Bizarre. The brief reveals that the Soviet government gave its consent to Egyptian actions which led to the withdrawal of UN forces and to the concentration of troops along the 1949 armistice line between Egypt and Israel. Yeah, just like, you know, they felt threatened. They felt really threatened, you know. It shared the Egyptian government's view that these steps would deter Israel from waging war against Syria. Okay. However, Moscow's reaction to the closure of Straits of Tiran was lukewarm. Folks, notice how there's nothing about the Palestinians here whatsoever. Absolutely not a thing. Okay? Arafat was just a twinkle in the KGB's eye at that time. Brezhnev considered the action misconceived, and he deplored the fact that Nasser had failed to consult the Kremlin before taking such a step. Yeah, he failed to consult because he was the guy doing the whole thing and whipping up people in the media and all this stuff with cartoons and all the rest of it. While the Soviet leader agreed that the ill-advised closure of the Gulf of Aqaba had indeed brought some prestige to the Egyptian president, he claimed that it provoked Israel to conduct a wider military campaign against its Arab neighbors. Oh, now it provoked us. It went from being full-on aggressor to being provoked. Brezhnev's report indicates that following the closure of the Straits of Tiran, Moscow was determined to avert further deterioration in the Middle East and to foil Israeli and Western plans for aggression. Fear that the blockade of the Gulf of Aqaba might provoke Israel into war led Moscow to exert diplomatic pressure upon the Israeli government. Simultaneously, Moscow did its utmost to tone down the belligerent rhetoric of Egyptian and Syrian leaders and to assure that no further provocation be taken against Israel. Brezhnev revealed that during a meeting of the CCPSU, held on May 30th, 1967, Syrian President Nur al-Din Atassi, then on an official visit to Moscow, had been asked to avoid taking any steps which could be used by Israel as a pretext to wage war against Syria. Okay, similar request was conveyed to Nasser in May 26, 1967. The Egyptian president was asked to do his utmost to prevent any armed conflict. Both Nasser and the Minister of War, Shams al-Din Badran, who visited the Soviet capital on May 28, 1967, assured Soviet officials on several occasions that Egypt did not plan to resort to armed conflict or to provoke Israel to wage war. Let's see, folks. Let me see if something... One second. Anything in the newspapers. You know, my friends, during the war, the Six-Day War, the Soviet newspapers wrote over and over again that Israel was the aggressor. The Egyptian newspapers reported to their people that they were winning. So, folks, it's funny. So, sometimes you'll see usually it's Arabs saying, Israel is losing, we are winning. So on this side of their mouth they say Israel is losing and we're winning. On the other side of their mouth they say Israel's committing a genocide. Genocide? Israel's losing. They're committing a genocide. Israel's losing, committing a genocide. Well, and then you question them, well, yeah, just like the Nazis, they're committing a genocide as they were losing. And then you come to them and you say, well, the population keeps increasing. Yeah, it increases despite the attempt of genocide. That's how great the Palestinian people are. Folks, the math ain't mathing. And as you can see, these slogans, Western imperialism, anti-colonialism, progressive socialism around the world. Israel is like folks. You know what's funny? Before I made Aliyah, my parents warned me that Israel is a socialist country. That it has like bureaucracy from socialism. So if Israel's a socialist country, how the hell is it stemming the tide of socialism in the world? Folks, does it ever occur to you that their math doesn't math? Or that their words don't line up with reality? You know what I'm saying? But you could see, this stuff that you hear on campuses goes all the way back to that time. Now they're talking about the Egyptian army and what Israel did to them. See, it says, the report shows that the Politburo feared that Nasser's regime would not survive the Israeli offensive. This was when we bombed the crap out of their Air Force. Therefore, the Soviet leadership was determined to achieve an early ceasefire agreement mediated by the UN. Notice how when they start losing, ceasefire, June 7, 1967, the UN Security Council adopted a draft resolution which called for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East. The IDF continued the offensive despite the appeal and second UN resolution calling for an early ceasefire. Subsequently, Moscow issued a stern warning to the Israeli government threatening to reassess its relations with Israel and to consider other means if the offensive had continued. It's like we're going to be very angry with you and we'll write you a letter telling you how angry we are. Brezhnev's report reveals that Nasser too was not ready to accept a ceasefire as yet. The Soviet leader deplored Nasser's vacillation that in itself served as an obstacle to Moscow's attempts to ensure Israeli compliance. Only on June 9th did the Egyptian government announce its willingness to agree to a ceasefire. But it was too late. By this time, IDF had completed its occupation of the entire Sinai Desert and had launched an offensive against Syria. Yeah, folks, by the way, which we ended up giving back. Menachem Begin gave it back. So it shows how colonialist we are, right? We took Judea and Samaria. We didn't even annex it. And, have been dilly-dallying since that time. Almost 60 years. Yeah, you see? To Moscow policymakers, the offensive against Syria was another stage in the imperialist campaign against radical left regimes in the Middle East. Determined to save Syria from humiliating defeat and occupation, the Soviet government attempted... The Soviet government attempted to force Israel to comply with two Security Council resolutions. Let's get out of the sun. On June 8, 1967, it instructed its ambassador to the UN to draft another resolution calling for an immediate cessation of hostilities and withdrawal of Israeli troops to the June 5th, 1967 borders. Oh, backsies, backsies, backsies. The next day, heads of government and the leaders of communist parties in Eastern Europe gathered to discuss the Middle East crisis. At the end of this urgently convened conference, held in Moscow, a communiqué was issued by the communist delegations condemning Israel as an aggressor and calling upon the Israeli government to stop the offensive and pull its troops out of Syrian territory without delay. Folks, had the shoe been on the other foot, there would have been parades in Moscow and every one of these socialist hellholes. Eh? Brezhnev relates, folks, you ever get the feeling this is like, it's like collective narcissism. When a narcissist attacks you and you retaliate. Oh, aggression. But if a narcissist, as he's attacking you, he's happy to attack you. He's thrilled to attack you. You're the bad guy, and he's going to continue to attack you and crush you. Eventually. Like, he's not going to stop until he crushes you, and then you retaliate. Oh, what's your problem, man? Brezhnev relates that this communique made little impression upon Israel, which continued its campaign against Syria. On June 10, 1967, the IDF captured the town of El Quneitra. One of the Syrian army's main strongholds on the road to Damascus. Syria's panicked foreign minister informed the Soviet government that Israeli tanks, supported by aircraft, were advancing on the Golan Heights in the direction of the Syrian capital. He asked that all possible measures be taken by Moscow to forestall the attack, otherwise it would be too late for his country. Fafo. The Soviet government perceived the occupation of Quneitra as another critical turning point in the June 1967 war. Subsequently, a rush to stop the Israeli offensive entirely. A Soviet missile cruiser and a number of submarines based in the Mediterranean Sea were ordered to set sail immediately for the Syrian coast. On the afternoon of June 10, 1967, the Soviet government broke off diplomatic relations with Israel. In a note to the Israeli government, Moscow accused Israel responsible for the brutal violation of successive UN resolutions calling for a ceasefire in the Middle East. The Soviet government also threatened to impose sanctions upon Israel if it did not stop immediately the military campaign. Other Eastern European countries followed suit and broke off diplomatic relations with Israel. In retrospect, Brezhnev claimed that this was a spontaneous action and it had not been planned or discussed by the Soviet and Eastern European leaders during their urgent consultations in Moscow. The USSR and other Eastern European countries felt a sense of urgency following the defeat of the Arab allies. Therefore, they were willing to take concerted action to stop the penetration of Israeli troops into Arab territories. Folks, it's almost as if, let's just forget about the fact that Nasser had this idea called Pan-Arabism. It's probably the most colonialist idea ever, to unite the entire Arab world under one Arab called Ummah under him. Like him and Syria, basically, right? Maybe a couple of other guys, Jordan, I don't know who else. Nothing to do with religion. It was more like secular Arabic with, religious accoutrements and socialism and communism, right? Brezhnev's report indicates that Moscow simultaneously conveyed an ultimatum to President Johnson, LBJ. The first part of the Soviet ultimatum was a strongly worded complaint, again, these angry letters, about Israel's non-compliance with the UN resolutions which called for an immediate ceasefire in the Middle East. The Soviet government then urged the US president to persuade the Israeli government to halt the offensive without delay. It threatened to take any necessary action, including military action, if Israel failed to stop the fighting within the next few hours. According to Brezhnev's report, this ultimatum bore fruit. Faced with Soviet pressure, Washington forced the Israeli government to comply with the Security Council resolutions and stop the advance of his armed forces into the heart of Syria. So basically this whole argument that it's helping the West colonialize or expand, America told Israel, to put a stop to it. Okay? Okay. Johnson informed Brezhnev, the Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, had sent to the Israeli government an urgent message demanding that Israel immediately implement all Security Council resolutions. In response, the Israeli government expressed its willingness to comply and subsequently ended its offensive against Syria on the evening of June 10, 1967. So basically, folks, it's America, actually, that stopped us from going to freaking Damascus. And we always capitulate, to whatever America wants. Okay? So, some colonial project we are. Tip of the spear, right? Conclusion. Okay, Brezhnev confidential report, CPSU does not shed light on controversial information regarding the concentration of Israeli troops on the Syrian border, conveyed to the Egyptians by the Soviet government in May 1967. Nor does it link the action with the outbreak of hostilities in the Middle East a few weeks later. The report seems apologetic in tone, with the Soviet leader attempting to avoid being held accountable for the provocation, which led Arab leaders to resort to bellicose actions. In turn, these actions spurred the Israeli preemptive attack and resulted in the humiliating defeat of both Egypt and Syria, the disintegration of their armed forces, and the occupation of the Sinai Desert, which again we gave back, West Bank, which Judea and Samaria, which we did not annex, have been dilly-dallying and gave away some parts of it, and Gaza as part of that whole thing, and Golan Heights by Israel, which we, by the way, were going to give back. We were in discussions to give it back vis-a-vis Clinton and Ehud Barak until the 1999, folks. Some colonial project we freaking are. Unbelievable. Okay? As the brief indicates, the Soviet leader held Nasser solely responsible for this catastrophe. He claimed that the reckless closing of the Tiran Straits to the passage of Israeli ships, now he's blaming Nasser, right, provoked Israel, big, bad, monstrous Israel, to conduct a wider military campaign against its Arab neighbors. The report suggested the Kremlin had no desire to incite an armed conflict between its Arab clients and the State of Israel, and that June 1967 war was a result of Moscow's clumsy diplomacy, grave miscalculations, and inability to control the crisis which it had provoked. You know? Like, it's like this guy, oh, I'm sorry, my dog bit you. Couldn't control it. And it provoked your cat. It grew out of a determination to foil Israel's aggressive plans against Syria and to frustrate what it suspected was a joint military imperialist scheme to suppress progressive forces. Folks, this is not a new term. Except that time they didn't have alphabet people and all the fruitcakes who don't even know what their gender is or don't even acknowledge what gender. Folks, these people would be thrown off for sure, put in mental hospitals. I mean, that's what Brezhnev did, and that's what the Soviet regime would do that to progressive people. The Kremlin assumed that these plans were part of a Western campaign aimed at overthrowing radical left regimes in the Middle East and to undermine the predominant position which the USSR had maintained in the region since the mid-50s. The brief demonstrates that Moscow operated under the illusion that Israel was a militarily weak and could not risk war on two fronts. It estimated that preventive action would deter Israel from waging war against Syria. Folks, I mean, we know that Hashem helped us. I can't say we were weak, but, we weren't exactly, you know what I'm saying? Every military strategist was shocked when he saw what we did. The Polish record indicates that after the outbreak of hostilities, Moscow had no plan to actively intervene in the fighting on the side of its Arab clients, nor did it take any steps to invade Israel, as suggested by some scholars. Brezhnev's account of the Six-Day War reveals that during this armed conflict, the Kremlin's occupants preferred the diplomatic front to military action. They were not even willing to deliver vital supplies of armaments, tanks, and airplanes to the Arab clients while hostilities continued. Politburo members were fully aware that Egypt's armed forces had disintegrated and could not continue fighting. Brezhnev's brief suggests that Moscow's sole plan was to exert diplomatic pressure on Israel to agree to an early ceasefire and pull its armed forces out of occupied territories. By pursuing this plan, Moscow helped to stall the Israeli offensive and guarantee survival of the radical left regimes in the Middle East. With the Israeli government defiant and reluctant to comply with a series of UN resolutions calling for an immediate ceasefire, the USSR and the majority of Eastern European satellites responded in what Brezhnev described as a spontaneous act of breaking off diplomatic relations with Israel. By the way, Czechoslovakia did not comply. They gave jets. I'm sorry, not jets, just like armaments and stuff like that. Guns. Simultaneously, the Soviet government concentrated a small naval contingent near the Syrian coast. It also put pressure upon the U.S. president to use his influence with the Israeli government to persuade it to stop its military operation against Syria without delay. This is a document on Soviet policy following the Israeli aggression in the Middle East. Report by Comrade Brezhnev on the plenum of Central Committee, June 20th, 1967. Let's click on this. Maybe it'll give us something interesting or different. So what's up, guys? Trying to verify who I am. Hey, taking too long. What's going on over here? No? What's happening? Oops. Apologies, folks, for the delay. Trying to get this document. Whoops. It's not letting me. Anyway, guys, can't get to the document. The kids are... Folks, I know it took me 25 minutes to get to this point, but here's the point. None of this is new. The language is the same. It all came from one source, my friends. The Soviet government, the KGB. They saw that they could not succeed with, regular military, with Egypt, with Syria, with Jordan, with all these guys. So they decided we're gonna train this guy Arafat, Egyptian guy by the way, and we are going to do this. We're gonna do this the long way, the long game, right? We're gonna foment this people called the Palestinians, who were never a people, who never had a country, who are nobody. When I say nobody, like they're just a patchwork of different peoples, of tribes from different artificial nation states, carved out by colonialists, both Arab and European. Okay, and we're gonna do this, guerrilla style. We're gonna do terrorist attacks. We're gonna do, we're gonna take hostages all over the world, on airplanes, until we get what we want. We're gonna kill, Olympic athletes from Israel in Munich. We're gonna do all kinds of stuff, guys. That's what they, decided. Commit terror attacks in Israel as you negotiate for, and then we're gonna get sympathy from the world, from the UN, of course, from American administrations to, and then we're gonna get to the point where, there's gonna be like a two-state solution thing. And then, because Israel, and then there's going to be like entities in Israel that don't want it, and we're going to vilify Israel for not wanting it. And then finally, in a way, guys, Hamas, I guess I can't say October 7th was good, but it just showed the real face of all these people, right? But you see, guys, by all these people, I mean everybody who's against Israel around the world. Campuses, Arabs, wokes, whoever, right? All kinds of commies, socialists, Gnostic fruitcakes. And you see, guys, the slogans are identical. Anti-imperialism, anti-colonialism, progressive, entities. X, Y, and Z, we continue, my friends. And at that time, you had these professors in college, who were like they were like the original hippies, and now their students became professors of the current kids. Or those students, those hippies became eventually professors, let's say in the 90s and the 2000s, and now we have, I think it's like the students of the students already. Now it's like it's like a Masorah, right? Passed down from generation to generation. To the point where now they've tried to integrate everything so much that it just doesn't, again, the math ain't mathin', right? You have the alphabet people with Islamists. The horseshoe is like very strange, very, very bizarre horseshoe. And now you add Groypers in the mix, these so-called self-styled right-wing guys, which is not even right-wing, in my opinion. Folks, I mean, now it's just a Cholent. It's just the Cholent now. But, and by the way, part of the thing was the KGB wanted was to destroy America in this way as well, from within. They knew, my friends, they knew, now we're not going to defeat Israel militarily. Doesn't matter if Israel's getting arms from America or not. It's not going to happen, right? Again, we're just way smarter than any of these, Arab militaries. So we're gonna do it guerrilla style. We're gonna do it with the media. We're gonna do it with PR. We're gonna do it with the UN. What is it? The International Criminal Court, the ICJ, ICC. You down with OPP? Yeah, you know me. All that stuff, right? My friends, the minute I heard this stuff, I'm just like, my God. The KGB is alive and well on American college campuses, in places like the BBC and Guardian, New York Times, pretty much everywhere, guys. And they just lie and lie and lie and lie. There's nothing new. And they're not going to stop until they get what they want, which is, worldwide, I don't know. It used to be just socialism or communism. Now it's just like, they don't realize that the worldwide, the caliphate will take over, and all their dreams of utopia are going to be crushed, by the caliphate, basically, right? They don't realize that. They're too brain dead, right? Just like they don't realize that the Soviet Union would have locked them up in mental hospitals, right? For, I don't know, not knowing what gender they are, or, I don't know, having like 60 genders at the same time. Folks, nothing new. And it's been how many years? Almost 60. It's been almost 60 years since the 6-Day War. And yeah, we continue, guys. We continue, and now they've taken over. Now they've taken over the Democratic Party. And now is a very, as we say in Russian, an important moment. Важный момент. What are we going to do about it? As a society, as a country, what is America going to do about it? What is Israel going to do about it? What is the civilized world going to do about all of this, my friends? We really have to, first of all, wake up, because I think a lot of us are asleep, even the good people. We have to look at ourselves in the mirror. We have to look at what's in front of us and say, do we want it? Are we going to allow it to continue? Are we going to allow the city of New York to deteriorate into a commie hell? Commie and or Islamist hell? Like a mini caliphate? Which is, by the way, led by a 12er Shiite, which is the same sect as the Ayatollah. Like, are we going to allow, New York to be led by a mini Ayatollah? Probably the most Jewish city in America. Yeah? Second most next to, I don't know, Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or whatever. Or, are we going to wake up? And, at least try to go to the ballot boxes and change this whole thing. And inform our friends and neighbors that, hey, this is bad. We're very close to, we're very close to getting what they had in the Soviet Union, my friends. That's the question, guys. This is where we are at in history. The slogans are all the same. And it seemingly has taken us 60 years to wake up. So the question is, how bad does it have to get before we wake up? Alright guys, I think I made my point. 34 minutes. Way too long, but probably necessary. Alright guys. Talk soon.